At Nagashino, the samurai did not disappear, but something they believed about war did. On a wet field in the summer of 1575, one of the most feared warrior houses in Japan marched toward a battle that was supposed to restore its power. Instead, it walked into a lesson so brutal that its consequences would echo far beyond a single defeat. This was not simply a clash of rival armies. It was a collision between two ideas of warfare. One was built on inherited honor, personal courage, and the prestige of elite mounted warriors. The other was colder, more flexible, and far more dangerous. It cared less about glory than results. By the end of that day, the Takeda clan would still exist. The samurai would still exist. But the old dream that valor alone could dominate the battlefield would never look the same again. The rain had passed, but the field still held it. Mist drifted low over the plain near Nagashino. Mud clung to boots and hooves. Banners moved through the haze like shadows. Horses stamped and snorted. Drums sounded somewhere beyond the fog, deep and steady, less like a call to battle than a warning. Men on both sides could already see the shape of what was coming. A fortress was under siege, relief had arrived, and neither army had come all this way to leave without forcing history to choose. For generations, war in Japan had been shaped by names, bloodlines, and reputation. The samurai were not just fighters. They were the image of warfare itself. Their armor, their lineage, their discipline, and their willingness to stake everything in combat gave them political power as well as military power. Victories were remembered not only as strategic successes, but as proof that courage and status still ruled the world. The thunder of mounted warriors, clan banners overhead, steel at the moment of impact, this was not just battle. It was prestige made visible. That image still had enormous force in 1575, but the world around it was changing fast. At the center of the coming disaster stood Takeda Katsuyori, son of Takeda Shinjin. His father had become a legend in his own lifetime, a commander whose speed, aggression, and control had made the Takeda name feared across Japan. Under Shinjin, the clan had come to represent samurai warfare at its most dangerous and admired. To fight the Takeda was to face a reputation that often struck before the army itself arrived. Katsuyori inherited that reputation, but inheritance is not command. He received the name, the banners, and the burden. What he did not inherit was his father's exact authority in the minds of men or the political moment that had helped make Takeda power possible. He was expected to preserve a myth in a country that was starting to reward something else. Because Japan was no longer a world where old prestige alone guaranteed survival. Alliances shifted quickly. Houses rose and fell with brutal speed. Men who adapted gained ground. Men who clung too tightly to inherited patterns were destroyed by them. No figure embodied this new reality more clearly than Oda Nobunaga. He was not interested in the beauty of traditional war. He wanted efficiency. He wanted control. He wanted victory. Beside him stood Tokugawa Ieyasu, quieter, patient, and frighteningly durable, a man hardened by years of pressure, betrayal, and survival. Together, Nobunaga and Ieyasu represented a new kind of power. Less romantic, less ceremonial, more systematic. Nagashino Castle became the place where these worlds would meet. The fortress stood in contested territory and was held for Tokugawa. For Katsuyori, it was more than a target. Taking it would reassert Takeda's strength, restore momentum, and remind allies and enemies alike that the old storm had not passed. So he moved against the castle and laid siege, hoping to force a victory before the enemy could respond in strength. Inside the fortress, the defenders endured and waited. They knew relief was their only chance. Outside, the Takeda tightened pressure and prepared to finish the work. Time mattered to both sides. Every day increased the chance that the siege would turn into something much larger. Then the relief army came. Nobunaga and Ieyasu marched toward Nagashino with a combined force large enough to change the entire equation. Exact numbers remain debated, as they often do in famous battles. But the larger truth is clear. The coalition army was substantial, disciplined, and ready for a prepared fight. More important than the number of men was the intention behind them. Nobunaga did not come to offer the Takeda a heroic contest on open terms. He came to dismantle the reputation that made them dangerous. And he chose the ground well. The field near Nagashino was uneven, softened by rain, and cut by streams and rough terrain. It was bad ground for a clean mounted breakthrough. Nobunaga understood that immediately. He shaped his defense around the field instead of fighting against it. Wooden stockades and barriers were placed to disrupt momentum and channel attacks. Behind them stood ranks of spearmen, archers, and large numbers of matchlock gunners. Firearms were not new to Japan, but here they were not a novelty. They were part of a defensive system. That is why Nagashino matters. Not because it was simply guns defeating swords. That version is too simple. The real story is more unsettling. This was preparation against expectation, structure against prestige. A commander designing a battlefield to punish instinct, facing an enemy whose identity pushed him toward exactly the kind of action that trap required. In the Takeda camp, that tension must have been almost unbearable. Katsuyori's officers were not fools. Some likely saw the danger of attacking a prepared line on bad ground. Some almost certainly argued for caution. But caution carried its own risk. The Takeda name had been built through pressure, aggression, and the belief that violence at the right moment could break resistance before it hardened. To hesitate in front of the enemy after besieging the castle and forcing the confrontation risked more than delay. It risked prestige. And in an age like this, prestige could begin to die before an army did. So the Takeda stayed. And as morning widened through the mist, the coalition line emerged in full. It was not scattered. It was not uncertain. It was waiting. The famous version of Nagashino reduces everything to a single image. Mounted samurai charging into walls of gunfire. Reality was more complex. The Takeda were not just cavalry. Japanese warfare was never that simple. There were infantry assaults, command decisions, confusion, archery, counter-pressure, and fighting shaped by terrain, weather, and timing. But the myth survives because it captures something essential. The Takeda still believed a violent breakthrough could decide the day. Nobunaga had built his line to prove that it could not. When the advance began, it did not begin in despair. It began in hope. Men moved forward through wet ground, trying to strike before enemy fire settled into rhythm. Horses surged. Banners leaned into the motion. Warriors shouted clan names as the first assaults came in with the fury that had made the Takeda feared across Japan. For a moment, the old method was alive in full view. Speed, impact, pressure, honor, force. Then the field took hold. Mud dragged hooves. Uneven ground broke formation. Stockades shattered momentum before it could fully build. What should have been a crashing blow became a series of broken impacts. The attack was still fierce, but it was losing shape even before it reached the line. Then the matchlocks answered. The sound was harsher than the old music of battle. Not the ring of steel or the hiss of arrows, but something heavier, more mechanical, more final. Smoke rolled across the field. Volleys tore into the advancing force. Men fell. Horses collapsed. Some attackers reached the barriers and fought desperately at close range. Some forced openings. Some hacked at wood, pushed through confusion, and tried to turn courage into space. But the line held. And because it held, each new assault became more expensive than the last. That was the true horror of Nagashino. Not one perfect instant in which the old world vanished, but a grim sequence in which the Takeda discovered, again and again, that valor was no longer multiplying their strength. It was feeding a system designed to consume it. The longer the battle continued, the worse the damage became. Among the Takeda were experienced commanders and veteran retainers whose presence carried years of authority. These were not replaceable men. They were part of the clan's memory, discipline, and political weight. As many of them fell, the loss was larger than the casualty count. This was leadership being cut out of the body of the clan in the middle of battle. And once that process begins, defeat reaches the mind before it reaches the line. That is how great armies often break. Not all at once, but through a spreading realization that the enemy remains organized while your own attacks are becoming thinner, costlier, and less believable. At Nagashino, the approaches to the coalition defense filled with dead, wounded, broken charges, and wasted prestige. What had begun as an attempt to restore Takeda dominance was turning into the mutilation of Takeda power in front of the political world. Yet the deeper the failure became, the harder it was to stop. Because this was never only tactical. It was psychological. It was dynastic. It was symbolic. Every fresh assault carried more than military intent. It carried desperation. Break the line. Recover the name. Prove that the son of Shinjin had not led his house into visible decline. Prove that the old strength was still real. But history can be merciless to sons. By the time withdrawal became unavoidable, the damage was catastrophic. The Takeda army was not erased in one theatrical instant, but it was broken where it mattered most. Its leadership had been gutted. Its confidence had been shattered. Its aura of inevitability was gone. Katsuyori survived the battle, but survival was not recovery. Nagashino did not destroy the Takeda house in a single day, but it began a collapse from which the clan never truly returned. Armies could still be raised. Resistance could still be offered. The name itself endured for a few more years. Yet something essential had been left behind on that soaked field. Enemies saw it. Allies saw it. Vassals saw it. The Takeda were no longer the storm they had once seemed. They were the memory of a storm bleeding in the mud. Less than a decade later, the house would fall completely, and Katsuyori would die with it. So was Nagashino the battle that killed the samurai age? Not in the simplest sense. Samurai did not vanish after this day. They would fight, govern, adapt, and survive for generations. Nor was the battle a neat morality play in which guns simply replaced swords. The truth is more serious than that. Nagashino was about terrain, planning, discipline, command pressure, defensive preparation, and the fatal weight of inherited expectations. It was about what happens when an elite warrior culture discovers that courage without flexibility can become a trap. What died at Nagashino was not the samurai themselves, but a dream about war. The dream that inherited martial prestige could always smash through colder systems of organized violence. The dream that personal valor remained the center of the battlefield. The dream that beauty, honor, and reputation could stay unchanged in a world beginning to reward calculation, coordination, and controlled fire. That is why Nagashino still feels haunting. It is not only the story of men losing a battle. It is the story of a civilization discovering that one of its most admired ideals had become vulnerable to history itself. Few moments are sadder than watching warriors realize they are no longer defending victory, but memory.